Hi and welcome to the September Book Squad video. Before I say anything else, I am going to address the fact that we are now almost a week into October before I've managed to get September's Book Squad video to you. I'm really sorry for the delay. I have had all manner of technical gremlins trying to film this video. Believe it or not, this is actually video recording number 5 for September's Book Squad. Should make this a very slick and well rehearsed video, which is probably the only time that's going to be the case. So without further ado, let's crack on. Welcome back to anybody who's watched one of these before, and welcome to anybody who's new. If you haven't watched one of these before, what happens is I choose a book to read for the month. Then at the end of the month, I come and talk to you and tell you what I made of it, and I ask for your views as well, which I like to include as well, and choose a book to read next month. So today I am reviewing my September read, which was The Lies of Locke Lamora. This was actually suggested by the Smorgasbord podcast on Twitter. Side note, that is the first time I've managed to say yours guy's name. First time. I am going to start off by saying I did enjoy this book. I did really enjoy it. It's a really interesting story. But what I will say is I was really worried that I wasn't going to finish reading this book in time to film a video for the end of September. I actually finished this book a few weeks before the end of September, and up until about 3 days before that, I was only halfway to 2/3 of the way through this book, and I didn't know if I was going to be able to finish it before the end of the month. The way this book is structured is that it's structured into 3 books within the one book, so it's in 3 sections. The first section concentrates on building the world that this story is set in, and how that's done is through showing them setting up a con, as it were, but the detail that is included is phenomenal. It's not set, or it's set on a completely other world that's had kind of an elder alien race which has built its cities and this whole world, and now there's a kind of human race living there, albeit there are kind of magical elements in there as well. There's massive detail around the societal structure, the customs, the different kind of races and behaviours of those races, the even down to the architecture, kind of the financial systems, the crime or the sort of law enforcement, the punishment aspects, sort of social classes. There is just so much detail, actually even to like cuisine and food. There is so much detail in the first section of this book that it makes it really hard to get into, because the plot is actually quite slow. And whilst that's really interesting and really clever, because I feel like I could draw a map of, the main city in here, actually it's quite hard going. And I could see a lot of people probably getting quite turned off by that level of detail when it feels like there's maybe not the reward of the storyline. The middle part of the book focuses on a much wider storyline and broadens out kind of the criminal network and the bigger, more threatening story that there is for the group to deal with. And then the final third is kind of all action, and it sees all of the storylines come together. That is where you get the payoff for having got through the level of detail in the early part of the book. Because in the final third of this book, the action and the plot moves quickly. There's one turning point, and from that, everything is really fast paced. And because you've had all that detail really early on, you can keep up with it without having to stop and think, which part of the city is this? What's the ramifications of them behaving like that? Who's this character? How does this all fit together? Elements that in the beginning are included that you just think that's a bit random, or you don't really pay any attention to, and then they come to play a really big plot line later on in the book, so that was really cleverly done. The other thing I wanted to mention about the structure of this book is that throughout the book there are what are called interludes, and the interludes are flashbacks to the early years of either Locke or one of the main characters from The Gentleman Bastards, talking about how they became involved kind of in crime, or within the Gentlemen Bastards, the training they've had, their kind of upbringing. Like that structure, I liked the interludes. They tended to be placed at a time that would give you a chance to have a bit of a breather from the storyline. So either when the present day storyline had become so complicated and so detailed that you just needed a little bit of a breather to let that settle, or when there was so much happening in the storyline that you literally needed that chance to keep your breath and the adrenaline to slow down again. One thing that didn't pay off for me, there is mention in the earlier parts of this book quite consistently of a character called Sabbatha. Now she is described as having been another orphan who has been taken into the same kind of group. The storyline goes that she was Locke's romantic interest. It seems like they had a relationship, but she has now gone away somewhere. He still pines for her, won't get involved in any other kind of romantic or sexual entanglements because he still pines for her. And the way it reads and the detail that's included about her, it feels like it's being set up for her to come back into the story. Either that she's going to turn up towards the end of the story to help out the Gentlemen Bastards when they are struggling and in danger, or that she's actually going to be revealed to have been there all along as one of the other characters. But she never actually reappears in the story at all, and it just feels like there was a lot of energy and effort put into building her into the story, that it's a bit of a letdown for her never to make any appearance, or there to be no explanation about hers and Locke's relationship and why she now has gone away. What occurred to me, there were two possibilities that occurred to me. It felt like either the author had intended to introduce her to the story but then decided it didn't fit but never went back and removed all the previous references to her, or that I am aware that there is a sequel to this book, so perhaps she appears in that, and actually the Sabbatha storyline, there is a setup for a future story in the next book. The thing that I wasn't massively keen on, this is a fantasy book, so you do have to suspend your disbelief fairly early on in the proceedings, and that's not a problem. My favourite books are Harry Potter. I'm okay with suspending disbelief and stretching the realms of reality. Not a problem. What I found difficult to keep stretching myself to was some of the inconsistency. Mainly to do with kind of the physical capabilities of the main characters. So as an example, Locke is described throughout the book as being quite weak, as being very slight, as not being particularly strong or a particularly capable fighter when it comes down to a really tough fight, and that he has to rely on his kind of wit and intellect to get him out of situations rather than having to rely on brawn or physical capabilities. Towards the end of the book, there are a couple of occasions, not just involving Locke, involving a character called Jean as well, where they are involved in fights. And in both instances they sustain really heavy injuries, and the way they are described and written up, they sound like they're life-ending, and for some reason they are able to just continue fighting through those injuries and then inflict fatal damage on their much stronger opponents. And it seems that the damage they inflict on their opponents is actually less than the injuries they themselves have sustained, but it kills their opponents but not them. The only thing that was a little bit maybe jarring for me was that just didn't feel quite right. I don't know, it didn't feel quite balanced enough. It tipped too far into the this is completely unrealistic territory. I wanted to say about this book, I already mentioned that I am aware that there is at least one sequel, maybe more than that, to this book. I am not currently intending on reading the sequel. That's not because this is a bad book, because this does really stretch the realms of reality, and you really have to suspend your disbelief. This feels like a once-in-a-lifetime story. I don't feel that I could buy into another story like that with these characters. I don't want to spoil what has been a fairly enjoyable read of this book by reading a story that kind of dilutes it. So as it currently stands, I'm not planning on going and reading the sequel. Enough about what I thought. It's now time to see what some of you thought. You did read along with me this month, thank you very much, and some of you have tweeted in what you made of the book. So at Ken Major, who is at Ken Major 83, said, I should mention I'm not a big fantasy reader, so didn't really work for me. Yep, fair enough. If you're not a big fantasy reader, this is definitely all out fantasy, and in some elements it is really out there fantastical. So I could see this maybe being a bit of a struggle. But Pow Science, who is at Pow Science, said, halfway through it's okay. The pace is plodding. Very little has happened. Author seems overeager to bowl us over with the complexity of the world he's created. Seasons, climates, economy, hierarchies, etc. That said, I like the main characters, Locke and the Twin, a lot. Granted, I'm not finished, but I'd like it more if the con was an actual mission and this was the Fantasy Ocean's 11. Yeah, I agree. I'd be interested to know is if you did finish the book, whether you felt that the action at the end of the book was a big enough payoff. Toxicist, who is at Digital Sneeze, said, I actually loved it. The plot is a little weak in the first book, but the characters are great. I've enjoyed the sequels too. Oh, so interesting you're saying this might be the weaker of the books and that you've really enjoyed the sequels. Maybe I might have to rethink, and maybe I shall have to put the sequel on my reading list at some point. One Good Thing, who is at OGTpod, said, gosh, this doesn't happen often, but I couldn't finish it. If that disqualifies me, then fair enough, but the style didn't sit well with me. It does not disqualify you at all. Not finishing the book in no way lessens your part in the book squad. You are still entirely welcome here. It's absolutely fair enough. Books, for me, books are a thing to love and enjoy, and if you are not loving and enjoying it, as hard as it is to leave a book unfinished, sometimes you just have to walk away from it. Who is Bonding Chris said, I had a good time reading it. It was like 3 years ago, so hard to remember the details, but I read the sequels and enjoyed myself there as well. So interesting, another person saying you really enjoyed the sequels. Fantastic, and I'm glad you enjoyed this book as well. That was the September read, The Lies of Locke Lamora, which means it is now time to announce the October read. So this time I have decided to choose, I think, the only book in my bookcase that I haven't actually read yet. It was bought for me a couple of years ago and I just haven't gotten around to reading it yet, and it is Frank Derrick's Holiday of a Lifetime. So I am aware that this is not the first Frank Derrick book, Frank Derrick being the character, not the author. There is a previous book called The Extraordinary Life of Frank Derrick, age 81. I have not read that book, and my understanding is that the events of that book do not directly impact on this book, and you don't have to have read the other book to enjoy and read and understand this one. So this is what I will be reading, Frank Derrick's Holiday of a Lifetime by J.B. Morrison. I hope that some of you will be able to join me in reading that book. If you are going to join in, please let me know on Twitter. Also, let me know if you've read this book before or if you have read the previous Frank Derrick story, and let me know whether I need to go and check that one out as well and what you thought of it. Be sure to let me know what you do think of this book if you do read along. You can find us on Twitter where we are at Jack Geekstalk. Also, keep suggestions coming in for November's book pick. I haven't chosen one for November. I haven't got anything in mind at the moment. So please let me have your suggestions, and hopefully I can choose one of those to be the November Book Squad read. And I think that is about it. She says, hoping beyond hope that this is the final time I will film the September Book Squad video. That's it for this month. I will see you next month. Bye.